the recording. And audience members, welcome to this session for Hammerforge 2019. I've got with me Larry Clements for Applying Intelligent Design to Team Selection and Development. Now, when you see a title like that, you pick up a little bit. So, well, intelligent design is pretty cool. Well, I like team selection and development. But who is this that's telling me about all this stuff? And audience members, I have to say, I've been chatting with Larry just behind the scenes for about the past 15, 20 minutes. And he is an incredibly interesting person. And I think Renaissance Man is very applicable since he did mention something about Renaissance fairs during the discussion. So as you would have read from his profile on the website, Larry has had a very interesting, adventurous path. He's been in the 82nd Airborne. He's an intelligence officer. He has been a leadership instructor and a facilitator for many years. I just learned that he's had his hand helping a number of big name companies deliver training before. He's got some books in the process. This man has done a whole range of things. And what we're hearing about tonight in terms of intelligent design, team selection, development, only touches on part of his experience and expertise. So Larry, welcome to this session today.
Well, thank you, Len. Thank you very much. So what is it that we want to hear? I mean, the truth is that when it comes to intelligence, it's an applied ability to adapt. And that's what we're going to be discussing this evening.
Right. And I think that's going to be it ties right into our theme for the summit, which is about team performance when it counts, under pressure, when you've just got to get it done and things are urgent. So one thing I'd like to ask Larry is, can you tell us briefly about one or two key experiences that you've had that have brought you to where you are now and that have given you the perspective that you have now?
One of the benefits of being in the military intelligence field is the other individuals that are dependent upon what you give them. The intelligence is affecting so many troops, operational troops inside of the special operations arena. It helps officers determine short-term and long-term strategies for success in the field. You get to see a play of what you have gathered become a reality in other people's minds. And when your words and your actions and your intelligence gathering has managed to save lives, there's just not an experience like that. So when it comes down to, oh, go ahead, Len.
Go ahead. I was going to say that is indeed something that can really be transformative in a person's life.
So when it comes down to, I have had a number of opportunities to see my intelligence directly affect things that were going on. But what impressed me most about the field I was in and the special operations personnel I worked around was the task assignment and understanding on how to develop a team isn't about gathering a bunch of people and slapping a label on them. And this is something I've carried on to all of my leadership development training.
And that is a very, what's the right word for it? It's a truth that a lot of us learn the hard way.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. And then I have one other question I'd like to ask people, and it's, do you have a particular motto that you live and operate by?
There's one that's going to be a key that I repeat over and over again, and as a life coach, as a business coach, etc., and is that we are more than the sum of our parts. And when we even scratch the surface of realizing that value in ourselves or in other people, we are on the right path towards being able to have people development, create business development and success. We are more than just our pieces, and very rarely sometimes are we at a position or a place to engage that, and that's unfortunate. And that's what the core of everything that I do is based on that one statement.
All right. I think that's a perfect way to get into your presentation now.
Understood. All right. So let's go ahead and get this.
Yeah, and for folks in the audience, if you have questions along the way, just feel free to type them into the chat window. The chat window has a number of different panels. There's a public chat, there's a Q&A. And if you put into the Q&A, it's really easy for us to see them. They're coming up, and then Larry will address them at some point, either during the flow of the conversation or very likely towards the end.
So one of the things, if you get to know me very quickly at all about the business world, one of the things that I fall back to consistently has to do with me starting in the martial arts when I was 9 years old. And I immediately, of course, fell in love with the Far East and the philosophies of Sun Tzu and the Art of War, which to this day I continue to apply in everything that I help do for leadership development and business development. So here we have a quote from Sun Tzu. Anybody want to chime in as to how they think this applies?
Let me read this through. I think, since I don't see any comments in the chat, I'll say it's because the intelligent ruler wants to know what's going on. Without the right information, you can't take the correct action.
No matter how you twist it, decision making on the spur of the moment with only your own mind is almost constantly doomed to at least a 50% chance of failure. So I mean, just statistically, from decision making statistics, and if you apply knowledge to your decision making, it means you have to gather knowledge. And this is usually where I start a conversation about listening, though we can't focus on that right now. So just a side note here, this is actually me forging. It is one of the things that I do as a hobby. So this is actually me forging a sword in the background. So what we're here to talk about, I actually got my initial idea from a person that trained me in the intelligence field. My focus was communications intelligence, comment, which is, gathering intelligence through being able to listen to other people's radio signals for the most part. Though I listen to cellular phones and any number of things to be able to look at and after some of the enemies of the state, as well as criminals that are out there in the world, to be able to assist with actions from not just DOD but DEA and other forces. This is how I used to get to work. I'm ex-82nd Airborne. My first leadership job was jumping out of airplanes to get to where I was going. The intelligence officer that was training us for being able to gather intelligence, one day we were working on a captured signal, and we were supposed to interpret it and pass the information on. That was our process. And in this statement, there was two things that, it was pretty garbled radio signal. Mm. There were two things that we could hear, and very clearly, which was bus and 17. So, Spanish was my target language, and in this case, we had, 17, and what sounded like something boost. Now, there were 12 of us in the room. 11 of us were straight out of basic training and had no real previous knowledge, and so light infantry was basically the only level of tactical knowledge that we had at that given point for the military. And 11 of us translated that as 17 autobus, which would be 17 buses.
Okay.
And the officer, was looking forward to seeing what was going to happen, because one of us was actually previously cavalry and had gone back into the service and had just chosen a new career. And this individual heard 17 obuses, which translates from that particular Spanish region as howitzers.
It's a big difference.
So one of the things that we're looking at here is that had 11 of us sent that information up, we would have been talking about troop movements, and one of us would have been talking about artillery, and this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable in decision making. You can't apply a decision making process to bad data and expect a good result. It's just not going to happen. And what's more important is that it made us recognize that inside of intelligence analysis, confirmation of data is extremely vital. But more so, and he pointed this out specifically, is that the team that's gathering that data needs to be diverse and capable of flexible thought, or they're going to pile on top of each other their consistent level of knowledge, and that is going to drive the information quite often in the wrong direction and not give somebody, as an intelligent leader, the ability to make a proper decision, because they're being fed information that's being stacked by people that all think alike. So again, I'm pulling on Sun Tzu before we continue. I won't beat y'all too many more times with his quotes, but the thing I say over and over again for my leaders, and when I'm trying to teach somebody who's a CEO and an executive leader, down to somebody that's hired me to make work-life balance happen for them, you make the plan, you work the plan. Now, everyone says it, everyone has talked about it, it's tumbled over most of your lips, but until you've actually made the plan and you can show it to me, I don't believe you. All right? But Sun Tzu said it thousands of years ago: make the plan, work the plan. All right? So going back to our dilemma and why we're talking about intelligent design for a team. The dilemma is that we have a concern about people that are thinking alike. Now, homogeny is the actual term for things coming from the same origin. So is it a horror for you? Is it a problem? If you have a standard kind of culture and you're building a culture for a business, it's very easy and often that we decide to build a culture with people we like, the people that are like us. We don't look outside the box. And this is actually hurting us. And so just as a small segue outside of the emergency management arena into just team building in general. All right. If you're in the top 25% of ethnical diversity for your group, you're looking at a 33% higher profitability coming out of your particular team or business. If you have a 25% gender diversity, if you're in that top 20, aren't. But and again, this is from McKinsey, and if you grab my PowerPoint, I'll tell you how to do that from my website here in a little while. If you grab the PowerPoint, that's an actual link to the study about diversity and how to benefit from it. But what I'm discussing here is the power of being able to have a team not homogenous, that they can think a little bit differently. They bring to the table different concepts. This is too valuable to not take advantage of. Otherwise, you have a room full of infantry guys that gave you troop movement information rather than howitzer information. And this is not acceptable. You can't do that and expect not to run into difficulties and problems. Another problem with homogeny on a team is it gives the appearance of being able to move very quickly, because the team members, when they all think alike, they're going to quickly, yes, sir, everything that's going on, and it gives the appearance of a faster pace, and that may be true in a lot of conditions. But is that going to be true in emergency situations? Is that going to be true when things are falling apart and you need to be able to deal with an emergency plan? Are you in the best conditions? Is everyone agreeing on the same thing, but then running into one obstacle that, if you are, say, completely ignorant of the idea that your building could be washed out by a tsunami, and you don't think about it, you never plan for it, if everyone is so much like you, they're probably not thinking of it either, and it doesn't become a part of your emergency plan. And then where are you when the tsunami hits? So diversity gives you the ability to have a range of thought that allows for what I call true collaboration. People throw around the word collaboration all the time to mean a bunch of people trying to butt heads together. But that's not what I consider a definition of collaboration. True collaboration is going to come from people who are working together with diverse thought and bringing to the table different perspectives. And then the best ideas can surface. The best ideas do not surface if you have even if you have managed to individually select the best possible team, Um, if they don't have a high communication ability, if they don't have a high emotional intelligence, well, then you're back into square one as far as the ability for them. What you can leverage out of their intelligence is lost. So
Mm.
again, it takes more than just the individual to be able to make the team. You have to have both a selection process that geared towards finding the individuals and being able to find the individuals' abilities to communicate to each other, or you don't have a team. You have a group of people. So we're talking about emergencies. We are talking about things that could destroy your business, things that are not planned for. And again, you're saying there's no volcanoes around me. There's no reason to have to worry. There's that tsunami hitting us. There's no reason to worry about some things. But, it's not just natural disasters. Here in Texas, most of what we'd have to worry
Yeah.
about is hurricanes and tornadoes. But one tornado hitting the right place. My mother-in-law, my ex-mother-in-law, was the lady who was hit in Dallas for the Mother's Day tornado back in the early 90s. And she was actually inside a mobile home that was pulled like a mile into the air before it was torn apart. And everyone in the building, and everyone inside of her trailer lived. All three of
Oh.
them lived, but her trailer landed on her neighbor, and he didn't.
Hmm.
So what can you plan for? How can you plan for it? If you don't ask the questions, you won't have any sort of response. And if you ask the questions too late, you're never going to be where you need to be as an emergency management team. All right. So what is the biggest fires? What are the things that are going to destroy your business? Is it natural disasters like the ones that I brought up, or is it an active shooter? Is it a multi-million-dollar lawsuit? Is it, there are a desperate need to understand the route you're going to take, the plan you're going to make. And this is where I go back to what I learned from my intelligence officer. You got to have different people. But one of the things that you have to know, without question, is who's going to make the plan. Is it going to be
Hmm.
your best leader? Is it going to be the communications guy that everyone loves and likes? Is it the optimist that you want making your plan? And I have to argue that no, you don't want the proactive guy when everything's working right to be the guy who makes the plan for when things go wrong. And for this, I pull back to my literary background, to George Bernard Shaw. Both optimists and pessimists contribute to society. The optimist invents the airplane, the pessimist the parachute. And this is where my cavalry guy comes to mind over and over again in my head. Who do you want making the plans? So when you're going to go about selecting an incident commander, all right, you're going to want somebody in that role who's going to be the person who's a bit of a pessimist, a bit of a prepper. You want the lady who's got the purse full of extra, pain medication for everybody, that, just because she's the one that is looking ahead and seeing where problems might lie. You want the guy who has the umbrella stashed in his desk just in case it rains. You want the person who's a bit of a prepper, who's thinking ahead about what could go wrong when Murphy is going to come visit. And that's the person that you really want to put in charge of the team that's going to make the plans. Now, if you have a large enough organization, you may need a group of people like this. You can't trust one person to be there the day that the accident happens. And one of my side notes here, and I will repeat this probably multiple times because I consider it vital. The person that makes the plan executes the plan. I don't care who the leader is that day, who the CEO is in the office and the desk. If you have an emergency, the ERT specialist, the CMT specialist, whoever your crisis management team, it does not matter whoever is that incident leader's choice plan. So you have an incident commander who's a bit of a prepper. You've got an ERT team that you've put together, emergency response team for emergencies. one person is assigned to actually do up the plan for an active shooter. If that person's there that day, guess who's going to be running that plan? And who's in charge? Just like in a special operations team, if you have a situation where you've created an A team with all these special skills, if you have a mission that's medical based because you have somebody you're trying to exfile back to the United States who's injured, well, guess who's in charge of most of that operation? Guess who gets to make the decisions during the operation? It isn't the commander. Commander gets the veto potentially, but the person that's in charge of making the decisions, the person that makes the plan, is the person that understands the situation the best. You really don't want somebody who's secondary to the plan executing the plan during an emergency. That's something you don't want. Any questions, guys? Any thoughts?
Let's see. Anything in the chat window? No, nothing yet. One thing I can add, I write down some notes here while I'm going along. Mm-hmm. And it makes total sense to me that the person who drafts the plan, or who is in charge of the team that drafts the plan, knows it the best, knows it inside out, backwards and forwards. They know it in their sleep. They know it to their very core. Mm-hmm. But that's not always the case, right? Some people in more senior positions figure, I'm more senior, therefore I am automatically in charge. So sometimes it's a bit of a hard sell, I think, for people who don't see it this way.
And this is where, when I'm structuring this conversation and talking to those leaders that want to have control, I, remind them who needs to be in charge during the emergency is the person that built the parachute. You don't want to jump out of the airplane in the chute that you built at the last minute when you dusted off a copy of the emergency plan. That's not the chute that you want to jump out the plane with. And this is, again, a consistent pattern. You're right. It is hard for leaders to let go. But if intelligence into this arena, part of the intelligence is to understand during an emergency, the person that understands it best has got to be at the reins. And typically, like a special forces team, you will have somebody who is a small arms expert. You'll have somebody who's a communications expert. And guess what? One of their jobs is to learn one of the other jobs. The communications guy is likely to have a background as a medic, because you're not always going to have that person there that day. But if you have a good, responsible incident commander, that incident commander is going to demand that they pick a protege in the team to learn the plan. So now you have a person who's responsible for the plan, who knows the plan in and out, and you have somebody who is second to that commander who can jump on board at the last moment if that's necessary. Then if you have the opportunity to go further and train another person, the more that you get the ERT team's responsibilities cross-trained, the more likely you are when an incident happens, regardless of the staff that's involved, to have that plan not dusty, but ready to execute.
Oh, your computer's giving you a message of some kind.
Yeah.
It's happy again.
All right. So one of the first things I discussed was emotional intelligence. And I know that rankles in a lot of people's minds right now. It's a very hot topic, but it's very, very powerful information. If you have the opportunity to read Emotional Intelligence 2.0, I highly recommend it. The Dalai Lama recommends it. You really, when it comes to understanding better how to communicate, it boils down to being able to understand the person that's sitting in front of you. And that, the Emotional Intelligence book allows you to understand yourself better and how you communicate, and it allows you to understand the people across from you and how to communicate to them. You can't get a more powerful tool to leverage. It's very learnable, and I would argue, willing to bet sums of money that if you actually applied that knowledge, you will see your life change. Whether you applied it only at home or at work, if you apply the emotional intelligence knowledge, you can change your life, because it really is that powerful a tool. Once you learn how to communicate better, once you learn what is happening in communication, this is something that has to be there for an incident commander. You have to have this trait, because they need to be able to understand the people on their team, their strengths and weaknesses. They need to be able to understand how to be able to communicate to them in very, very tough situations. You need that pessimist. You need that person who's a prepper. You need them to be able to think about how Murphy is going to come to visit to screw up the plans.
Yep.
And as I've driven home multiple times, communication is so vital, but it's not just communication of how to talk to a particular individual. In this case, we're talking about being able to communicate cross-team, cross-organization, being able to be commander. You're going to have some situations where you have to make decisions on the spur of the moment. You can't wait for committee. When that situation happens, you have to be able to know how to give commands, but in a way where people will actually listen and do and follow. And that's two completely different skills. Anyone can scream across the battlefield, but the ability to actually be listened to takes more than that. And it also takes a active pursuit of the lines of communication. They have to know you. You just can't come up and start barking orders. It doesn't work. All right. You have to be able to understand how to make a decision, not him and ha. When the situation comes, that person, that prepper, is actually probably more likely to have the tool set to be able to make a decision because they've thought about it. They've given themselves the tools necessary to be able to engage and jump on board the problem, and already probably have thought of a number of solutions. Whereas if you were hit blindly by, say, an active shooter environment, sometimes fear takes over. And as a physiological trait, fear has a lot of benefits, but it typically causes you to freeze because of way it processes information. It causes a lot of blood to flow into your limbs so that you can run away from the mountain lion. That's what the whole fear response is for. The fight-flight response is designed to make you afraid, dump a bunch of oxygen into your bloodstream inside of your limbs so that you can run away from the mountain lion.
Yeah.
That's what it's designed for. But if it's dumping it in your limbs, what's it taken away from?
Taken out of here, taken out of a whole lot of places.
It's taken out of your head. Your head loses the blood for your limbs to be able to gain it, which means, why do people freeze? Why do people, when they get extremely angry, why do they lose rationale so quickly? Well, it's because they have lost rationale. Their brain isn't working, and it has to do with the lack of oxygen. So you have to have the ability to delegate. The incident commander cannot run the show. And this goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Len. If you have somebody who just absolutely steadfast has to have control, you're going to have a losing situation, because emergency situations, you need to be able to delegate to a number of people who actively need to pursue courses of action at the same time. You can't afford to sit around waiting for them to go, well, I want you to do this, but then come back and report to me. I want you to do this. No, that doesn't work. You have to be able to say, I trust you with this, run. I trust you with this, run. You've got to have the ability to delegate. The person needs to be able to be calm. If they get excited, again, flight, fight, response, they lose the ability to rationale, you've lost your commander then. That you've got to remain calm. That person needs to be who everyone turns to and sees as the rock. Even if they're not internally a rock, they need to be seen as the rock. So even if they're, my fiance's really got an amazing skill at this, where she can run into these horrible situations with her, employees, and she immediately is a rock and solid and doesn't really display reactionary emotion. And this is a powerful thing. And when you look to a leader, you want that ability to know that they're not just going to react to you. You want you lose lines of communication if people are afraid to talk to you. So it's vital in an emergency situation that everyone's communicating. Well, if they're afraid of you, they're not communicating, and it just is going to exacerbate the problem. All right. So again, made the plan. The incident commander needs to make the plan, needs to know it in and out, as Lennon said earlier. And one of the most important characteristics a human can have for success is grit. whether you call it endurance, which I'm going to be talking about here in a couple of days for the next webinar, building team endurance. When it comes to one of the most powerful character traits that's going to guarantee success, it isn't just being proactive. It isn't just being motivated. There is any number of skills that people can say. You need to be intelligent. You need to be adaptable. What's going to always lead you to success is grit, stick-to-itiveness, the ability to continue down that road, the ability to pick yourself up again. There's an old samurai axiom that says, fall down 7, get up 8. And, you want to always understand that your success isn't an opposite of failure. Failure is the path that leads you to success. We learn more from failure, we gain more from that knowledge, and we are more successful in the end the more we've had the opportunity to fail. Some of the biggest flops in existence historically are when somebody has luckily been successful. And they've luckily been successful, but they didn't get the knowledge and the discipline necessary to be that successful, and it burns them in the end. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about just the team in general, what you want on a team, assuming you have enough people involved. Of course, you want that incident commander. Typically, if I'm designing the team, I want my second in command to be an operations specialist, and I want him to be an optimist, or her to be an optimist. I want them to have the skills necessary to execute the plan with a big smile on their face. I want them to look at your emergency plan and know what's going to happen operationally, what's going to fail, what's going to be affected, how are we going to work around it. Is our backup systems in place so that if we lose our data center in Florida due to a hurricane, did it back up to Colorado? Can we go operational the next day? The operations person is supposed to understand the key elements of how the plan affects and brings about that. Can we go live again? Are we still in crisis mode at this point? The operations commander is the counterpoint. The operations specialist is the counterpoint to the incident commander in being able to apply the plan and put the wheel on the road. All right. You need a safety or security officer that's focused on just that, on the safety and security of your people, personnel, business, data, so that their goal is to maintain that safety and security realm inside of the emergency plan. Their goal is to focus on helping you make the part of the plan and how it's going to affect information, how it's going to affect the safety of your personnel, what's happening to your personnel. I mean, it does you no good to have 1,000 employees that, because of the water's poisoned, can't make it to work, have to be relocated, or nowhere near your business. These are your people. These are the people that run your business on a day-to-day basis. They're why you're successful. Are you going to step up and help them? This is a reference to a dragon slaying event that my fiance had, where they had a similar hurricane occurred, that one of their centers was down. They actually relocated their personnel to a building that they owned that was a pharmacy building, to where they could take showers and have clean water and so forth, because their homes were gone.
Right.
And this is, so as an emergency team, you're not just thinking about that business continuity, but for the business itself, but business continuity, because the most important valuable asset you have are the people. Yeah, and you want to be able to make sure that they're back, able to live through the process, so that you can come back and you're not having to start over again. You want a communications, I'm going to have a division here between the communications specialist. I want personally a communication specialist that's going to focus on the internal dynamics, the team dynamics, that's going to focus on how to delegate information within the company. And then I want a liaison who's responsible for outside communication, who's calling emergency services, which emergency services are you calling? You have a toxic gas in the building, or you have a poisoning that's going on. Who is it that needs to be communicated with on the outside? That person who's responsible for researching that and understanding that's your liaison. The person that's responsible for the internal communications is the communication specialist. These two, as far as I'm concerned, should not be the same person, or you're going to pull their hair apart for them when an emergency actually happens, because they're going to have too much on their shoulders. So, and of course, a research individual. Now, you can structure a team in any different way, but I highly recommend that we go back to what I was talking about with diversity when we're looking at that team. Don't just look at this team and fill it with people that you like. It's not going to work. It's not going to be helpful. And in the long run, you probably will have unlikely made a proper plan. You'll end up butting heads against the wall, not when you made the plan, but when the emergency actually happens, because you won't have a plan that's successful. If you want success, you need collaboration. If you want collaboration, you need diversity. If you want that diversity to be effective, you have to have communication. And this goes all the way back to the beginning. Are you going to be the cavalry guy or the infantry guy? Are you going to be the pessimist or the optimist? How is that going to affect what you're doing? How are we doing, Lynn? Is there any questions out there? Are we good?
I don't see anything in the chat at the moment, but one thing that I do have is about, and you might be coming up onto this, is actually identifying people's different strengths and inclinations. How do we do that in order to get that diversity and slot people into the right places where they can make the most of things?
Well, part of that, this is where I'm going to refer to outside sources that can be very beneficial. Part of that is understanding, again, the people and communicating to them through emotional intelligence. It is the fastest, quickest way you're going to be able to leverage the knowledge of how these people interact with other people, whether or not they're that pessimist prepper you're looking for, by being able to do I like to run teams through the emotional intelligence book and the quiz that they give you that it explains your level of emotional intelligence. The best part about emotional intelligence is that it's trainable. So even if someone scores exceptionally low, it doesn't matter. What you now is you have now a path for this person to be able to learn and gain and grow. And so one, I would highly recommend the emotional intelligence. Two, and again, this sounds a little old school, but I'm a graduate of Dale Carnegie. And when it comes to some of the best training for communication that has ever existed, Dale Carnegie had it. He became a public speaker by force. He used to practice speeches when he was riding his horse back from school. He developed the best programs for being able to teach people how to do public speaking. This, if you can run people through even the free courses Dale Carnegie offers, there isn't anything out of that realm that won't enhance the communications of your people. So I guess to boil down your question a little bit, Len, it's not just discovering people that have these talents previously. In fact, that kind of always irritates me when people says, well, how do we find the talent? Well, you don't necessarily find the talent. What I'm talking about here is making the talent. And you can find the skills, you can find the precursors, you can find indications that these individuals have some of what you need. But then there's a number of these skills that I've talked about. They're all trainable skills, which means that you can go back to training them to have the skills that you need to be a better team, to be that collaboration. Like decision making, there's a great book out there by Kepner Trago called The Rational Manager, The Rat Man. And if you've ever been familiar with KT is the actual decision making process that was used by NASA to bring home the Apollo mission. So when it comes to again, this is like the other spectrum of people. The idea here is that you can train people to make very rational decisions on information, but they need to know how to gather that information. They need to know what to do to process that information without getting their gut involved. And that is how a proper decision is made. One of the things that if you get to know me, you'll hear me harp on is that you manage things, you lead people.
Yeah.
And when it comes to KT, it is some of the best rational management information you can have on the planet. It really does boil down. Kepner and Trago were social scientists, and they did a longitude study of Air Force officers making decisions, problem solving, and they brought together the best practices. And you can't really do much better than Kepner Trago.
Mm.
And in fact, I actually was the program manager for Kepner Trago to the management teams at Dell Computer, and that was some actually revelationary, training for me. I had done similar things on my own from the past, from my military intelligence days, similar things that I had applied, but nothing quite as succinct and powerful as the rational processes that KT offers. And so, do you want somebody that's rational and making decisions based upon data and information? Yes. Well, that's a managerial process that slides over towards the robotic side of the mind, the left, the right brain instead of the left brain. And this is where you end up, being able to evoke that kind of skill over being a creative and being able to bring, creativity to the picture. Which is necessary for emotional intelligence and social, constructs and communication. So how are we doing?
One thought that comes to my mind is that it still comes down to then intentionality on the part of the folks who are keeping their eyes open for what the people are showing them, what the people are telling them, and then structuring the development as you go along. But it requires that you have that intention in the first place.
Yes.
Because I can recall a number of exercises that I've been part of in emergency operations centers where it was pretty evident that more senior folks were not paying attention to what was being revealed about people's inclinations, their strengths, and even where they were ill-suited and ill-fitted.
And when you start stacking a bunch of people where they're ill-fitted and then expect them to collaborate, you end up, the results are disastrous. And I've seen, this is why people end up calling me to come in and do an analysis of their business or to be able to audit them, is because it falls apart for reasons that don't make sense from a rational standpoint from the outside until you start investigating the details of what's happened when you've basically thrown a bunch of people in a room and expected them to butt heads and a result occur. And that just doesn't work. And unfortunately, a lot of people, and this is one of the things I harp on, is that, I argue that you should not try to hire talent as much as train talent. You hire to the culture. You hire to the team, and this is basically my biggest focus. What's this team's mission? This type of team has a very specific mission, has a very specific goal. And the best way you're going to be able to make sure that those goals are successful and that your business is going to be standing after everything is said and done is to make sure they have the resources, tools, and talent. And that doesn't necessarily come, through the hiring process, because the person that you're going to assign to this is going to be somebody that's an internal hire for something else. It's going to be somebody who's known your business for a long time. You don't want necessarily to hire someone from the outside that's going to have outside ideas, who's never seen the structure of your business, all of a sudden jumping in and making your emergency plans. You're putting that person in a position of failure. There's no way for them to catch up to some of the internal, details.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still there?
I'm still here.
It just told me that my screen share stopped.
Because I ended it there, just to give us more screen real estate on here as we're discussing back and forth. So that was me, sorry.
Not a problem.
So Larry, can you say a little bit more about the interaction between, or the interplay between selecting for cultural fit, and yet also having that diversity of viewpoint, perspective, and thinking?
All right. So when it comes to repeating, I don't want to sound like I'm hammering the same thing over and over again, but to me, you're going to have better success with a cultural fit and training to the skills that you need. So if you were looking at a team and you say I have the perfect incident commander, but the perfect incident commander, as far as being able to think about how Murphy's going to come to visit, can't communicate his way out of a paper bag, I would be inclined to take that person and make them part of the team, but not the commander. I would take that person and then start putting them through communication courses and seeing if I can't raise their communication skills to meet the level of what I need. Because the skills can be trained, but your culture can stand and fall on putting the wrong people together. And that's that, you really, with a lot of other teams, you can afford to build a team over time. But with an emergency management team, that team needs to be cohesive from the start. Or you're basically, you never know when an emergency is going to happen. You never know when you're going to have an active shooter walk in the door. You don't know, and you need to have that plan, not dusty somewhere in the background. You need to have that plan right there, accessible. Somebody knows what to do, who to call, where things need to happen, who needs to be delegated to. If somebody's not there, who's the next in command. That doesn't need to be thought about on the day of the incident. That needs to be pre-planned and ready to go. As a part of your business continuity needs to have a clear outline of how it's going to continue.
Very true. Very true. It actually reminds me of a lesson that I learned actually in a neighboring state in Alabama. I was at a summer camp there called Aviation Challenge. I don't know if it's still around, but the basic premise there is you take these school kids and for a week, you put them through military aviation related experiences. And I remember being in a helicopter dunk simulator, simulating the crash of a helicopter into a body of water.
Nice.
And I, not really thinking wise, I ended up in the pilot's seat. So that would be the number one spot. And with a whole bunch of us, we're just waiting there until, okay, they're going to dunk us. And we didn't think anything of it. But one of the counselors kind of looked at me and said, hey, you know what? You're failing as a leader. And I said, oh, what? I was lost. And he said, you're number one. What happens to you? Who's number two? Who's number three? And so on. And I don't remember his exact words, but it really stuck with me that wherever you find yourself, you need to have a backup identified, and they need to have a backup identified, so on and so forth, because you never know what's going to happen to anyone along the chain.
Right.
So that's just something that comes to mind for me, listening to some of these lessons that you're imparting to us.
You're absolutely right when it comes to the vital understanding of succession plans. It has to be a part of the nature of this concern. Just because you have an emergency incident commander that's brilliant to handle an active shooter, if they get shot, you're in trouble. And you need to make sure that the plan includes the idea of succession strategies and that the people that are in the succession position are trained up and ready to go. And if not, you're planning to fail. And that's the if you're going to make the plan to succeed. And once you make the plan, work the plan. But don't make the plan to fail. Make the plan to succeed. And that takes, again, going back to our very beginning, intelligent design.
Indeed. And this reminds me also of something that a lot of us, we know, but we don't always do. And that's making sure that we have that end in mind in order to create the plan and working the plan. I think very often it's tempting to just, you had an idea of where you're going before, and then you just put your head down, you're just plowing through, and then eventually you start losing sight of where it was that you were supposed to go towards.
Right.
And that's when your efforts become dissipated, your effectiveness takes a nosedive.
One of the things that if I'm putting together a team, emergency team for somebody, I go back to the idea of the same thing that you do for the business and business development and the business plan. The emergency team needs to have a mission and vision. And that mission and vision is what you realign everything to along the way. And then you go back and you revisit this regularly. One of the things that I would put in charge, the resource materials individual, the resource officer is going to be responsible for also maintaining and looking at, hey, we need to revisit this plan. We haven't seen it in so long. We haven't practiced this plan at all. We need to practice it. A plan does you no good if you have no knowledge of it and it's just sitting on the back shelf. Oh, I made that 4 years ago. That doesn't work. You need, if you're going to be an effective emergency response team, you need to be able to have a plan that's active and up to date, and the phone numbers are up to date, and the contact information is up to date, so that the plan actually works instead of you trying to second guess who replaced who.
Yep.
The day of. That doesn't work.
And it's also not just a matter of head knowledge, but also being able to translate that into executing it quickly, promptly, effectively.
Yes. The plan, the strategy, has to be in place. The tactics have to be there, and the strategy has to be there. So the overwhelming strategy needs to be there from a general's perspective, and the tactics down to the minutia need to be planned out so that the tactics can be executed by all of the individuals that are going to be responsible for taking your business to the successful conclusion of whatever the tragedy might be.
So Larry, in your work with a range of different organizations, we're talking about this kind of intentional, directed, ongoing team development.
Okay.
What would you say is the biggest stumbling block that people come across that trips them up?
Ego.
Bar none.
Bar none, without question. Ego is responsible for the worst decision making. It goes back to what you had brought in about people that want to maintain control, that don't want to let go, don't want to delegate. Ego is one of the biggest offenders of success. And once you get leadership that's infused with too much ego, once you've gotten people that are decision makers with too much, you end up with people making decisions again with only their own cortex involved, and oftentimes from an emotional base, because we make most of our decisions emotionally. Most people are not trained in Kepner-Trago. They don't have a rational structure of decision making, and they're right. Yeah. They're right probably about 50% of the time. It's that other 50% that we pay for.
Very good point. So Shan Institute, I believe, can help people with some of this. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, I created Shan right out of my experiences working as the Kepner-Trago program leader at Dell Computer. I've seen over and over again for decades some of the leadership skills not being able to be obtained by leaders because of the nature of the way most businesses work. They tend to structure themselves to some extent on hiring talent without hiring for culture. They also have a tendency to hire within, and this goes all the way back to the 60s and the Peter principle of hiring people and raising them up to the level of most incompetence. So you end up with leaders that don't have leadership skills, and so I saw this huge gap. The Shan Institute, it means mountain in Chinese is what Shan means, and the Shan Institute is a hearken to my early days as a martial arts instructor to adults when I was 12 years old, and it harkens to the philosophies of the wisdom of the mountain. Every culture on the planet sees mountains as places of repositories of wisdom. And, I didn't want it to be something I bashed people across the head with, but my goal with the Shan Institute was to focus on the business development, focus on business and speaking the language of business, which I do, but bringing the wisdom that comes along with massively important leaders like Sun Tzu and Miyamoto Musashi in the Book of Five Rings. These, bringing these philosophies that have been around for thousands of years that have been effective. Dale Carnegie, is probably the most read book next to the Bible, most translated book next to the Bible. Is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Bringing that wisdom to businesses today in a digestible form. And so there's my secret, guys. My goal is to bring wisdom to businesses. That's what I'm doing. I'm packaging it in tools that will actually bring about success for you. We don't have to talk about Sun Tzu to be able to apply his methods of success. He just created the best military text of all time for how to resolve conflict. So, business is like, in many aspects, like conflict all the time. And if you want to resolve conflict, why not go to the master who created the fundamental text for it? And this is why I created the Shannon Institute. Where it comes from is the same sort of knowledge that I bowed down to and respected as a martial arts student with my senseis and my masters that I studied under over the years. And I want to bring that same sort of concept into the business arena. And that's why I created the Shannon Institute and why I'm out there promoting this ability to be able to bring wisdom to business development through human-centric focus, being able to take human capital development as the path to making business successful.
And if I may suggest by extension also for government agencies, this also applies.
Absolutely. There is a twist on a number of levels on how an organization like that works, but many of the same things apply. And when it comes down to what I experienced with military intelligence, what I experienced working with special operatives, you can't get more powerful a force than a group of people that are willing to focus and work together as a team. And you can do that inside of government. You can do that inside of agencies. But you have to, again, hire for culture, not hire for a set of skills. If you're hiring a checklist, you are going to be paying a checklist. If you hire a person that fits into your skill set, group, communication, socially, that culture, you can train them for the skills.
I know that can be a bit of a challenge for some hiring processes in the public sector, but there are workarounds for it. There is flexibility within those bounds.
I can push over and over again. Anybody out there that wants to say that they can hire talent and make it successful over hiring culture and make it successful, I can prove to them how they're going to end up with burnout. A burned out individual works at 1/3 the rate of a normal individual. I can start showing you millions of dollars of loss in the burnout that anybody's created by having a bunch of people they've thrown in the room together rather than an actual culture. And so if anybody wants to go toe to toe on wanting to understand the losses that they are incurring right now in turnover and burnout, I can show it to them. I can show it to them on paper how you really want, again, to hire for culture and train. That is the best method. Talk to Richard Branson, talk to Guy Vaynerchuk, doesn't matter. All of them say the same thing. If you don't hire for culture, you don't have a team. And that's where the power lies. If you really want collaborative power, the power that I showed earlier in that diversity study, that the 33%, the 27% because of ethnical and because of gender diversity, that this isn't numbers that are made up. This is a study that's done to show that when you bring multiple people together with different perspectives and you create the right cultural environment, profitability is sure to come because, again, best ideas rise to the top of a group of mixed vegetables. If you're only having peas, everyone's bored. And nobody's doing their job. And that's, again, a reference to just being burned out.
All right. We're coming close to our time here. Any questions from the audience that you'd like to pass along to Larry? Give the audience a few moments. While they're mulling that over, Larry, what are the top 2 or 3 resources you figure the audience members can look up for themselves to really get into this more?
Well, shameless plug here. You can always talk to me. I'm always happy to be able to try to communicate and help out in any way that I can. But my resources aren't hidden. I'm not going to sit here and say that I discovered these secrets by myself. First thing you saw was a reference to Sun Tzu, The Art of War. There's 1,500 different translations of it. Go pick yourself up one. Understand the art of war. Understand the subtext inside of Miyamoto Musashi's The Go-Rin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings. The Book of Five Rings is kind of a digest of Sun Tzu's work. And so if you don't want to take the time to read all of Sun Tzu's complexity, fine. Pick up the Go-Rin no Sho. They actually make versions that are translated for business. Don't waste your time. Focus your time. The Rational Manager. One of the most powerful books on the planet. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. You can't trade wisdom. You can't. It's too powerful. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. These are where I take these knowledge of these masters and I take them into your business and I apply them in ways that actually are structurally effective in today's society. And the reason why I'm talking about masters that are thousands of years old has all to do with the fact that their stuff is timeless. Their information is timeless. That's why we still refer to them.
Vetted over centuries and millennia.
You can't get better than applied science.
All right, so Larry, you mentioned about getting in contact with you. How do people get in contact with you?
Well, ShannonInstitute.com is always available. There's anyone listening, if you go to ShannonInstitute.com/PPT/ my PowerPoint is there, so you can pick up my PowerPoint and then keep that with you. It's got the links to that study and other links in it. And so if you have any questions, feel free to communicate to me at larry.clements@ShannonInstitute.com. I'm reachable by phone locally here in San Antonio by 210-782-0396. Shoot me an email, text. I very rarely sleep. So anytime that you want to have a chance, I can't always guarantee a rapid succession, as I do have a full plate and multiple businesses that I run. I have, if you haven't recognized me, I was on the History Channel. I was on Forged in Fire. I didn't make it to the last round, but my hobby is forging knives and swords is a little bit more than just a basic hobby. So I am a very active individual, but I will get back to you as quickly as possible and see to your success as quickly as we can.
All right. And I want to add also as well for audience members, if you go onto the actual Summit website, onto the page for Larry's presentation today, once this session is done, that particular page actually serves as a conversation platform amongst you as well. You can leave comments, you can leave questions, you can upvote. So that's another way to interact with one another, in addition to just reaching out directly to Larry himself. And so, Larry, I'm going to let you have the last word on this session today.
Again, I want to go back to my quote from the beginning that kind of sums up everything that I do. We are more than the sum of our parts. And together, we're more than we can imagine. In the long run, you are much more than you think you are. And, reaching your potential is what I've driven for my life to be for you guys, is to help people reach their potential. But you got to start with you. You got to believe in yourself. So remember that you are much more than the sum of your parts.
Thank you very much, Larry, and audience members. Thank you for participating today. Be sure to catch Larry's other session coming up later on this week, and all the other speakers that we have as part of Hammerforge. Thank you so much, and have a good night. Larry, if you'd like,